And I know this is a good point to stop and say that some people get really, they're polite about it, but they get understandably upset when they're like, oh, this is just going to be a philosophical presentation about headline writing, subjective, what makes good content. What about data? What about keywords? What about metadata and scalable best practices? I love all those things. That is not what we're here to talk about, because those things, there are entire experts in this. There are entire SEO plugins for this. I'm not going to try to replicate those in one talk. But yes, best practices are great. It's really good to identify them, not just for the industry, but for your own platform, whatever that may be. If you're creating content for a specific site or whatever it is, or even like a video platform, what do you name your content? If you have a podcast, what do you name your episodes? There are best practices for those, but they change. They change as the platforms change, as your audience changes, or what kind of specific audience you have. Lots of other factors. The specs are important, but they don't matter as much if you can't figure out what makes a good headline in the first place. Knowing, oh, it needs to be 40 characters doesn't really help you if you have no idea what those 40 characters should encapsulate. So that's kind of where I fall on the data versus content. That said, let's talk about data for a quick second, because yes, it's really a great way. And if you are creating content on a platform where you can go back and look at historical data, even like a year's worth of data or whatever, if you're starting from scratch, okay, yes, just experiment, have fun, try to create really compelling content. If you are at a platform that's been creating content for a while, really ask around to find the data. It can be harder than it should be sometimes to find that data. You really have to sometimes find a friend in the analytics department of your company, or your wherever, to get that data. If you're pushing all of your content out to a third-party platform, sometimes it can be impossible. But do whatever you can to look at the data that's unique to the content you're pushing out. So I give a quick example on the side here. This is from a few years ago, but when I was an editor at Adweek, I wanted to see, okay, what is the length of headline that actually generates the most page views? What kind of, is there a trend? Are 150 character headlines terrible? Is no one clicking on them? And so what you can see on the array here of how many people were clicking on each one is the top chart is the entire site. So basically you can see, okay, 60 to 80 characters up to 90 characters seems to be the sweet spot, or where most of the traffic is taking place. Few exceptions on the low end, few exceptions on the high end. But your meat is happening around the 90, 70 to 90 character mark. Okay, cool. But that's an entire website packed with tons of content. So I was like, well, I'm the creative editor, at this time. Are there trends specific to my subset, to my section of the site? And the answer, as you see below, is very clearly yes. That we had this spike around 40 characters, like 45 characters, and then again around 80 characters, and then a steep drop off as you got past 90, 95 characters. Great. I use this to basically say, okay, we've got two templates of headlines, a 40 character and an 80. So if your headline is the best ads of 2022, that's really tight, 40 characters. Boom. It's going to be a pretty big reach. And then why is there a gap in between? No idea. Is it a search thing? Is it an algorithmic thing? Is it a human nature thing? I don't know. I'm not here to parse the data so much as just to say like, hey, headlines at 40 and 85 seem to be good. So find that data for yourself. If you can't get that kind of data, look at subject line data for emails that your company is sending out. Chances are the audience is the same. So you can it's generally very easy to find not just the open rates on email, but also the click-through rates, so that you can kind of get a sense of which ones are actually working, which ones are bringing people in and keeping them there. And really, this is probably obvious in 2023. This used to be a harder thing to really kind of to get people thinking about, is that the headline that is displayed on a website is not necessarily the headline that people click on, right? Because you've got your share headline, your SEO headline, whatever you want to call it, that is the one that comes up on search, the one that comes up on social, the one that's embedded, or that's like, that you see as part of your packaging online. You got to make sure that you're analyzing that. Because if you just look at your display headline, you may not be learning anything. You really got to make sure that the data is specific to the versions of headlines. Those may be the same headline. That's great. That's a best case scenario where your share headlines and your display headlines are exactly the same. In reality, sometimes it's nice to have that playground of the longer headlines.